the heart of the state-of-the-art. At the dawn of the next stage in entertainment, you found No Proscenium.
You have indeed found No Proscenium, the voice of everything immersive. I'm your host, Noah Nelson, and welcome to episode 392. This week on the show, we welcome Nataki, Garrett, and Scarlett Kim of the Oregon Shakespeare Festival and Latoya Peterson of Glow Up Games to talk about Hella Iambic, the collaboration between the famed theater company and the game studio that has previously worked with the likes of HBO on creating original games based on existing works. The existing work in this case is Shakespeare's best-known play, Romeo and Juliet, and the Hella Iambic app is adding a whole new dimension later this month to OSF's currently running production of the play. There's a great conversation ahead. Seriously, loved this. Fantastic. Can you guess the part that I laughed at not only during the recording, but also laughed while I was listening back to the recording at like the same spot? Can you? There's a great conversation ahead, but first, the news. It's been a big news week, and by big news week, I mean Thursday was enormous, tossing a lot our way. The biggest piece of news for our field being the announcement that Disney's Star Wars Galactic Star Cruiser, the 2-day-long immersive adventure that caused sticker shock for many and FOMO for even more, will be taking its last voyage at the end of September this year. This after opening in the spring of 2022 and having just won a Thea Award and, according to Disney, their highest customer satisfaction ratings for anything in the parks. More of my take on the closing at the end of the show and in this week's edition of The Irregular coming up in the backer-only feed, because you know we had to. But that's not the only news out of Disney in Florida. Seemingly as part of the ongoing battle with Florida's Governor Ron DeSantis, who is using his power to attempt to punish the company for taking stances opposed to his on the subject of gay rights, the company has announced it is scrapping plans for a $1 billion corporate campus that would have moved the headquarters of the iconic Imagineering division from Southern California to the Orlando area. The planned move had already caused upheavals at WDI, and with the news brand new and corporate cuts happening across the entertainment giant, it's yet to be seen what exactly this reversal means for Walt Disney Imagineering employees who stayed on in recent years. Finally, some unabashedly upbeat news, and indeed this was the first news I saw today, and I was like, oh, it's going to be a good news day. Up-and-coming immersive entertainment company Cosm, not long after their announcement of a deal with the NBA to bring games to their dome projection venues, announced a partnership with digital artist Nancy Baker Cahill, no stranger to this show, to bring Cahill's visual narrative project Seek to their upcoming venues, the flagship of which will be in LA's Hollywood Park. You can check out more about Cahill's work and Cosm as a company in episodes 381 and 365, respectively, of this very podcast. Speaking of connections, here's something else. You'll be able to meet a lot of the people we just talked about, seriously. Tons of them, including Nancy Baker Cahill and Scarlett Kim, who is one of this week's guests, at the Next Stage Immersive Summit coming up on June 2nd through 4th here in Los Angeles. We're getting down to the last batch of badges and are just 2 weeks out. And we've been adding even more incredible speakers from Meow Wolf, VR for Good, Netflix Live Experiences, and more in the past couple of weeks. Check out the website in the show notes. The full schedule is going up this weekend, and don't get to the other side of this month and find yourself feeling the FOMO. Take your career in immersive and experiential to the next stage. Also, want to give a quick shout out to one of our latest sponsors, and we've got a couple more to announce next week. I just got to clear the language for it. I want to thank our friends over at Yes Please Coffee, my dear friend Tonks over at Yes Please Coffee, who is our coffee sponsor for the next stage, and also the person who keeps me most caffeinated. Thank you, Tonks. Thank you, Yes Please. I'll put a link to Yes Please in the show notes. Yes Please. Basically, seriously, the official coffee of No Proscenium. I mean, that's just true at this rate. It's what I drink in the mornings. And we're going to be able to give a bunch of it to our guests coming up at the top of June. So free coffee, everybody. I mean, of course there's free coffee, but good free coffee? That's a rare thing. All right. Before we go, just want to thank our latest podcast backers as the rally to keep us going continues. This week we've added new backers Cassandra Ikniowski, Witten Frank, and Jason DeLeo. We're holding steady above $3,000 a month, that oh so important line that makes this show and everything else we do possible. Remember, as little as $2 a month makes a difference to us, and hitting up patreon.com/NoProscenium not only powers the podcast and websites for No Pro and Everything Immersive, it also gets you into our member-only Discord. In fact, we started scheduling backer-only and professional hangouts in the Discord, weaving together our community a little tighter over coffee, or whatever you want to drink. I'm drinking Yes Please. Something I'm getting myself to wake up early for. I did today, which is why I sound so loopy. It's the 12th hour of working. Whee! If you're already a backer, don't forget to link your Patreon account to Discord. And don't worry, I took some breaks in the middle. I took a walk. If you're already a backer, don't forget, people are always like, oh, you work too much. And I'm like, no, I have adult ADHD is what I do. This means I'm always working because I'm always, squirrel. Don't forget to drop us a review on iTunes or podcatcher of choice. I'm not even fixing it. And share the articles you find useful on your social media platform of choice. It helps immensely. Also, I can't see any squirrels. It's dark. We are always No Proscenium. I had a lot of sugar, except on Insta, where we are No_Proscenium. Oh man, Noah. As always, big thanks to our sustaining backers, Samuel Mystery, Chris Woolman, Samantha Davison, Eric Shamlin, Elaine, Daryl, John Boulette, Jay Bushman, Jerome Joseph Gentes, Tom Leonetti McGuire, Kurt Collins, Winthorne, Ryan, David Bassick, Richard Ayers, Lonnie Hands-On, Lecker LeCool, the Ministry of Peculiarities, and Jan Budman. And yes, we have a backer discount coming in the Patreon soon. There's going to be a discount code for the backers of the show for one of the shows here in the Hollywood Fringe, specifically Boston Bar Bloodsuckers. That's coming up. And if you are someone who wants to hook up our crew with special deals, hit me up at noah@noproscenium.com for details. And with that, all that news, all that information, and more to come on the back end, let's get into this truly excellent interview with our three guests. Joining us now are Nataki, Garrett, and Scarlett Kim of the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, and Latoya Peterson of Glow Up Games, who are all here to talk about their collaboration, Hella Iambic, a mobile game designed to be played during the production of Romeo and Juliet that is currently running at OSF. The game will be making its debut at the end of this month. Hella Iambic explores the space between live theater and immersive play and blurs the line between classical literature with hip-hop. Now, since we have three guest voices on the show today, let's take a moment to let everyone ID themselves. Nataki, why don't we start with you?
Hi, everybody. My name is Nataki Garrett. I am the outgoing artistic director of the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, and I use she and her pronouns.
Scarlett?
Hello, everyone. I'm Scarlett. I use she, her pronouns. I serve as Associate Artistic Director and Director of Innovation and Strategy at OSF.
Latoya?
Hey everyone, I'm Latoya Peterson. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the co-founder and CXO, Chief Experience Officer at Glow Up Games. And, we make games and playful experiences that center Black and Brown joy.
Okay, so I read that core copy above about Hella Iambic. I want to cop. I did not write that, but I read it. And as someone who is from the Bay and the 90s, it feels so good to use Hella in a professional context. So thank you for that. Latoya, I want to start with you. For someone coming to this production of RNJ, what does the app add to the experience, and what will they be doing it? Help us wrap our brains around this.
Absolutely. So this project kind of was dreamed up out of the really interesting take that Nataki and Scarlett were looking at in terms of the Oregon Shakespeare Festival and how you make these works more relevant. We're a traditional game studio. I cannot say that we thought about theater before this point, before working with OSF. It was not a thought that we had. Though myself and my co-founder, Nataki, we both really love experimental play. And we love things that blend the physical and the digital, all these different pieces. One of my favorite things at GDC is Experimental Games Workshop.
Nice.
And so this idea of being able to play in different contexts with different types of tools is always appealing. And so when we first found out about Oregon Shakespeare Festival and some of the work that they were doing, it was just really interesting and boundary breaking and ceiling shattering in a way that is a place that we like to play at Glow Up. Like, we're the first all women of color founded game studios. There just aren't that many executives of color in games, especially not in the C-suite, especially not running studios. And so a lot of the work that we started to do with our projects was around reflecting cultural storytelling and things that made sense from our point of view. And so, we were generously offered to come out and to see what Oregon Shakespeare Festival was doing and how they were like reimagining these different pieces. And then looking at some of the contemporary plays that Nataki brought as well, it's kind of like, sitting in Confederates, I think was the moment where I was like, okay, we actually have to do something with them. Like, I don't care what it is. Let's figure out what is something we can do to support this awesome mission. And so the idea was floated that we would start with Romeo and Juliet, which is, again, like, I think probably the most iconic Shakespearean work. You don't have to read it to know the plot. You don't have to do anything. So it kind of made a lot of sense from a world building perspective. Everybody knows the plot, even if they haven't read the play or understood it or listened to the Shakespearean version. It's just so in the culture. And then what Nataki brought to it with the artistic vision, we really loved, because so we are a game studio deeply rooted in hip hop. We have a chief rap officer whose name is Samus, who helped create RhymeStep, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And so our main mechanic is a rap rhyme composition mechanic called RhymeStep that we pioneered for the Insecure game. And we were looking for new ways to use. And so when we saw Nataki's idea for Romeo and Juliet, that it'd be very West Coast, very Bay Area, we were like, oh, okay, we have to figure out what we can do with this. So we looked at our existing rhyme mechanic. We started thinking about ways people could play and play in a theater context. Because again, the biggest hurdle to get over is that cultural expectation that in the theater, your phone is down, everyone is silent. There isn't like that back channel. However, that's really like counter Shakespeare in a lot of ways that we were talking about, where, they were used to the peanut gallery. Things are repeated all the time because they assume people are talking over the actors. There's all these different pieces, and the ways in which we've evolved to use our phones as second screens and as, back channels during major events. It just made a lot of sense to adapt the texting mechanic that we had in the Insecure game and the hip hop mechanic and combine it into something that could work for a live theater experience.
I noticed one of the things in the deck was about everyone gets added to the Verona group chat.
Yes. So, part of this is that we're spinning up as a prototype. We had no idea and never tried to work for live theater troupe before. We have learned so much in so many ways. For example, one of the things is that the script changed all the time, but it's the same script. Like, Romeo and Juliet is the script. But depending on the production, people put emphasis in different places of the script. Never really occurred to us, not being thespians, but, like, that's apparently a thing. So as we were thinking about what to do, we thought, what would be fun? And what would be fun for particularly a newer audience coming to the theater, a newer audience that's less versed in these classics? And we went, okay, well, most folks are in a group chat anyway, in some form or fashion, right? Normally text, WhatsApp, Messenger, whatever you like to use. Most people are in conversation in that way, or they send short videos to each other. So the first thing we thought was, what if we created an experience where you are now a citizen of Verona, and you get to have all the trash talking from my personal favorite character, Mercutio, and all of the other folks who are side characters. I personally am kind of obsessed with side characters. I really like their perspective on how things are playing out, because everybody always looks at the leads, right? But what are the side characters doing? And so the first thing that we came up with was kind of the Verona Bros group chat with Mercutio, Benvolio, and Balthazar, and how they would talk trash about Romeo. So, how you have your friend in a group chat, and maybe there's like a subgroup chat with, slightly less friends that might have slightly more shade. And that was the goal we were going through. We said it was kind of like a Black Twitter meets group chat feel. And we wanted the player to feel very intimately involved. So initially, the first concept, it was just the Montague perspective. And just anybody allied with House Montague. And as we started playing around, as we started seeing how the production developed, we realized we needed to kind of bring them more broadly into Verona. And it also gave us a lot of space in the group chat to play with characters that are unseen, like Rosalind, who is, arguably like one of the more iconic characters. The whole reason Romeo's at this party, but you never hear from her, you never see her. So giving her a voice, giving Mercutio's brother a voice, giving the prince a different kind of voice, and being able to have that all blend together was really appealing to us.
Like almost a little bit of like, Rosencrantz and Guildensterning it. For those who don't know, that's, there's the play, the Stoppard play that like takes us through parts of Hamlet with like the side characters, but like using the app to give that extra dimensionality of like what's happening off stage. And what would be happening off stage is everyone would nowadays would be texting each other, right?
Yeah, especially at the party scene, right? Like that was one of the
God.
biggest ones where they're all searching for Romeo, and everyone in Nataki's production has a cell phone. It is just following logic that they would be texting Romeo, where are you? What happened? Bruh, where you at? Like those things just made a lot of sense in this world. And then also allowed us to open up a window to like the educational portion. So we're really careful. We're trying not to be like branded as ed tech because that's not exactly what we do.
Mhm.
But one of the things that's interesting is how do people interpret something in Shakespearean language, which you don't use on a regular basis? Are people understanding? Are people seeing things? So it also became a place to reinforce what was happening or give greater context to why
Right.
certain characters are behaving in the way that they are. And then to also introduce, quite frankly, a lot of shade to what is going on. Like Romeo and Juliet is this great tragedy, but it's also super ridiculous and kind of absurd when you look at like the chain of events that happened within like 2 days. And
Oh
so
yeah.
for us to be able to be like, as a modern audience, be able to kind of talk back to what's happening without disturbing the play was a really appealing place for us.
So this is so the group chat's popping off while the play is happening, so people are able to engage with it, or are they just seeing? Are they interacting to some degree?
Interacting. So we'd use choice-based narrative in a
Okay.
lot of ways. So it works similar to our Insecure game. And one of the things that we really had to work on for this integration was when is someone's eye supposed to be up on the stage versus when should they be on the app? And that's a tough one because,
Mm.
again, on one hand, audiences' attention naturally wanders during any kind of program, any kind of thing, and people are used to at this point toggling between their second screen, what's going on their phone, and their primary mode of transit. It doesn't matter if it's the Super Bowl or the Oscars or the Emmys or whatever. Any kind of live large event, people are normally going between like what's the reaction happening and then what is going on in front of me. And so we were looking at that dynamic for Verona, but one of the things we wanted to be mindful of was just the craft that is involved in live theater and that intimacy that comes with stage that you don't get with other types of mediums. And we didn't want to break that at key moments. So there was one moment that I think Scarlett and Nataki can speak to where they were really like, oh, we should do the Queen Mab moment. We should do the Queen Mab moment. We should make something. And then when I saw what the actors did with the Queen Mab moment, I was like, absolutely not. We cannot put anything on screen during this. Like they have choreographed it. It's only a minute long. Like they're going to miss too much. Like it's got to be before or after. But working out those pieces of when are eyes supposed to be up? When do we direct things back? When is somebody allowed to kind of wander? So when we get into these meandering scenes, is this the point where we put in like a text from the friar? Is this a point where we put in, some shade from Paris? Where are the places where the app is enhancing but not detracting from the main work?
I love, and I want to open this out to everybody because I love that you're thinking about this design problem, because this is the design problem that popped up when people first started messing around with second screen experiences. Like I remember, oh, this must have been back in 2011, 2012. There was Fourth Wall Studios, which was trying to create second screen or all-in-one second screen experiences for television shows. So they like produce these television shows, and then they're having like second screen experiences you could be having at the same time. And they had Patrick Soon-Shiong, like the billionaire who now owns like the LA Times, who made his fortune on medical. He was like the investor in this thing, and they were trying to crack this, and like no one could crack the actual flow. And it sounds like, and Scarlett and Nataki, maybe you can jump in here. It sounds like this is starting to approach it almost as if the AR and the app is the equivalent of like a soundtrack score. That there's an interplay between the text and what's happening in a way that's meant to not overwhelm it.
Well, one of the things you have to think about is there are some people, so phones are in the room, people are using them, doesn't matter. Phones
Yeah.
are going to ring, if you're at a certain demographic, your phone's going to ring because you forgot to turn it off, and if you're at a different demographic, your phone's going to be on because you're engaging with your armrest partner on in a conversation about what you're seeing. And so I think one of the things that I think is important is it's not about providing like an additional source of entertainment. It's about acknowledging that you're likely to have this thing in your hand anyway, and you're likely to actually be using it as a point of engagement anyway. On opening on one of the previews, there was a group of teenagers in the room, and they had their phones in their hands, and they were holding their phones to their hearts, right? Because it's just an extension of your hand now. It's just something that you have in your hand. Whereas I think in 2011, it was still this, sort of odd to, carry this thing around with you and answer it while you were in the grocery store. You were less likely to be so tied to it. Now so much is engaged with it. So instead of acting like that's not happening, one of the reasons why I was excited about this particular collaboration is because it does say this is happening. We intend for it to happen. And if this is something that you're doing anyway, you already have it there. If you're going to hold it here, you might actually pull it down. You might engage, you might not, right? We want to engage with you if that's what you're doing. Um, I also feel like there's a in the theater, in the space of the theater, there is this. I've had somebody say to me, "Well, I just can't handle it when the phones are in the room," and I was like, "It's like saying you can't handle it when like breathing happens or when somebody coughs in a room. It's a part of the experience." And they were like, "Well, you're just encouraging it," and I was like, "No, actually, what I'm doing is acknowledging what's already existing. And I'm saying that there can be an alignment between what exists and what we mean to happen. There can be intentionality behind how those two things connect. So I don't know if it's a soundtrack, right? So because some people might not engage it until after they leave the theater. And it's like if it doesn't happen, if they don't actually open the app in the room, the play still happens. If they open the app and they're in the room, the play still happens. What it is the acknowledgement that there is that these two things are existing simultaneously and symbiotically, and that there should be an opportunity to engage in those two things. Should that be your choice? I actually believe that either one of two things will happen in the next 5 to 7 years. There'll be a complete banning of cell phones in these rooms, and if you have your cell phone, you'll be ousted and banned from the theater, right? Or there'll be more opportunities for people to engage with this apparatus that they have in their hands anyway.
Right.
And those are the most two likely most things to happen in a theater. And that is if young people, that is if we can get a younger generation into the theater, because if that younger generation doesn't come into the theater, the people whose phones are left on because they forgot to turn them off will eventually begin to die off, and there will be no engagement with another generation of people in any way, shape, or form. So what I'm saying is that since all these people are in the same space, why not just acknowledge that the machines are in the room?
Yeah. Well, and there's something, the way that you're approaching this one from a creative point of bringing in the characters who don't have as much of a voice in the show as the script has, but who clearly, like Rosalind, have agency in the world. It's opening up the iris to gather more perspective and give dimensionality to Verona, which we to Latoya's point, we've either absorbed via osmosis or we've been coming back to over and over again if you're an old theater hand, and you get bored with the main characters really early on and wonder, like, yeah, but what's like, do the friar and the nurse have a history? You just start wondering stuff and wanting to see what's happening at the edges of it all, and this creates an affordance for that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
just to add, sitting behind the high school students, which I love doing. That's my favorite seat in the house, to kind of understand and view how they view and experience how they experience theatrical storytelling. So that's where I always sit during our previews. And I really have been, with our production of R&J, thinking a lot about how attention is embodied is so much more expansive and pluralistic. Like I mean, and it really made me think about when is a moment in life where I'm doing one thing. I'm almost always, if not always, doing more than one thing. And the students are sitting in front of me and they're kind of responding to the show, but responding to each other's responses. And I'm like, actually, these are not, it's not like a primary, secondary, and tertiary experience. It's actually all this kind of kaleidoscopic, layered, holistic experience. And I think that was very moving to me because I feel like, when I came up in the theater, there was such a hegemony of, oh, there has to be a single point of focus on stage, and there's this one singular story. And if you don't get it, or if you don't identify with it, then you're like, then you're a loser. I don't know, and you're outside of it. So to me, this what's most liberating about this project is that it's a radical permission giving to our younger generation of audiences that you can actually be yourself, and for you to bring yourself into the experience is not additive or something that's secondary or auxiliary. It's actually something that's being conceived of as part of the total experience. So yeah, I'm excited about, this is the beginning of thinking about, oh, theater, how we experience theater, can it actually be something that's more of a call and response? Can we think of it, which is, of course, as we know, the origins of performing arts was always a call and response. And we were joking during previews about during the Elizabethan theater times, like people would throw rats on stage as a way to express their effervescence and enthusiasm. So like, where did that go?
Or they'd pay extra to be on stage and be seen like hanging around at the edges, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
or they'd throw tomatoes, or I think the other thing is that even in this sort of, I don't know what version of theater that is normalized right now, even in those spaces, somebody's going to open a cough drop, somebody's going to cough, somebody's going to whisper very loudly that they couldn't hear what was happening on the stage. I mean, it's like you're in a room with other human beings,
right.
and the whole operation is trying to make you feel like you're sitting at home in front of your television. And I just am, like I, I'm Black, for people who can't see me, and I grew up in spaces, including all the way through college, in which the call and response was a sort of native part, of my experience. So when I went to white theater, my experience was sit on your hands and act like you're not in the room. And when I went to any other kind of theater, my experience was let people know that you're in the room, and make sure that they can hear you clap and laugh loudly. And so this idea that somehow you're supposed to be like non-existent in a space with other human beings is really, I think, antithetical to how these plays were constructed, why they were constructed, who they were constructed for. And it's all about a kind of setting a comfort level that's around elitism, as opposed to creating a comfort level that is about connectivity. So if you like, cross culturally, there are all kinds of human beings that don't actually exist in these spaces, in which they try to hold very still and not cough, right? And so this engagement again is an acknowledgement that, like, you're in this space, you're engaging with other human beings. If you're a certain generation, you're likely engaging on your device. If you're another generation, you're engaging because you're in a room with other people. Either way, it's about setting the intentionality and making it so that it's possible for you to make those engagements.
There's also a degree particularly when it comes to live, anything, but particularly theater, like the thing we get from going to the theater and seeing people perform with other people in the audience is a thing we cannot get, Nataki, to your point, sitting in our homes watching television. And it feels so much like, for a lot of the 20th century, it was trying to, like, theater was trying to replicate, what people expected from, watching CBS Playhouse at home. And you can still go to some theater and see, a unit set on a proscenium, and it just, I watch a show like that, I'm just like, why am I even here? Like, someone wanted, I've seen people write plays that were clearly structured like screenplays, because you spend 30 minutes of them like taking in and out the set in the darkness, because for like 2 minutes of a scene, and it's you're not in the room, like they're not keeping you in the room, they're not keeping you alive. And the older I get, the more I just want to be alive in the room with other people. Like that's everything, particularly after the last couple of years where we spent far too much time in the format we were actually the four of us are actually in right now, which is talking into video screens. There are, in terms of like using tech in conjunction with live performance, there are a lot of different streams going on right now. The work that you've been doing at OSF with the Quills Fest has been exploring a few of them. How did you zero in on the Hella Iambic, app, that this idea of this, what feels almost like a platform, as the tool for the moment that we're in? I think we've covered some of that question already, but I'm just, why this point right now?
I can start to answer that. I think, game as a practice, as a community, as a, as in all of the things that games can be, I think that has been a really powerful and abundant way of thinking about participatory storytelling. And I think, I think all theater is casting the audience, even if it's in a proscenium, but game allows us to kind of think about that more directly. Like in Hella Iambic, I'm being cast as a citizen of Verona, and I have agency, and my participation is actually an act of co-authorship. So I think game is a really rich way to break open kind of passive consumption that we've been talking about for the past little bit here, and really kind of thinking about what are other modes of participation and casting the audience, and shifting our relationship to the audience to one of co-conspiring, and also world building. We talked about how all of these kind of things that are seen as on the fringes in the world of the diegetic world of the play kind of suddenly become this immersive world around you, and you have an agency to kind of interact with it. So, and beyond that too, it just in the process of game design, like even thinking about the concept of play testing, I'm always like, oh, so interesting. Like play testing and theatrical ensemble rehearsal processes, like so much in common, and also so much that these two paradigms of collaboration can learn from each other and enrich. So I'm just like also a nerd about bringing in these different disciplinary kind of practices to interrogate what we mean by best practices, because often those are, also compounded with exclusionary principles, and also like create hybrid practices to really think about new ways of storytelling. And I think game and theater together like can do something really alchemical and powerful.
Are you noticing in this process anything that it's kind of crossing over, in that alchemical formulation this time out?
All of it.
I don't know.
I
I
mean,
think it's yet to be determined where because we haven't, it hasn't been launched yet. So, part of my excitement was Latoya's hella cool, and so I was like, whatever you're doing, I want to do it with you. And like really, like sometimes as an artistic leader, sometimes you're making decisions based on that kind of intuitive sense that somehow something genius is going to come out of making a salad with somebody who's a genius. And so that's my deal, is like I had these ideas around Romeo and Juliet that I've had since the seventh grade. And I felt like uh I OSF, we did want to do something with Latoya anyway, and so this seemed like the best intersection between those ideas.
I want to follow up on that since the seventh grade note, because it's something that Toya brought up earlier about what the vision of your R&J is, and I want to delve into that for a second, because the theater nerd and the Bay kid in me is coming out, and so like. Take us through this. I've heard Bay, I've heard West Coast, hip hop.
Yeah.
Like, what was seventh grade Nataki's dream for R&J, and how is it
So
manifested?
I was introduced to Romeo and Juliet by Verda Delp at Willard Junior High School in the seventh grade. And I didn't know until much later that I had a singular experience with that, because Miss Delp taught us Shakespeare as if A, it were art, B, it were poetry, and C, it belonged to us. And
Mm.
so I never had that moment of like, I don't like Shakespeare because it doesn't belong to me. I actually had complete agency and ownership from the very first time I read it. Um, and I think the only thing that I was, the most concerning part of the story to me, because we weren't talking about teenage suicide, we didn't like have these ways of looking at it or breaking it down, in the late 70s, early 80s in the Bay Area. What I was most concerned about is why are all these white people so unhappy? They're like rich, and they have means and servants, and like, why are they so upset? And like, so one of the things that I saw, I mean, and this, I've been holding on to this for years, is to a way to answer that question. If I were to remove the accoutrement of privilege and access, what happens to the story when it's about two kids who live in a very desperate situation, in which their parents are trying very desperately to get them out of it. Like
Mm.
what happens to the story if they don't have access to means? Because I don't know, I feel like I grew up in Reaganomics, 1980s Bay Area, when the trickle down theory was in full form,
Oh, and
and
public
nothing was
education was
going
getting
anywhere.
just ripped
Exactly.
apart.
My
I was
mother
I was up in
school
Richmond Unified, and I think sounds like you
yeah.
were in Berkeley Unified, and like
Mhm.
our districts were whooped on,
Decimated.
destroyed.
Yes.
Yeah.
And my mother was a school teacher, and
Oh man.
so and who worked two more jobs to make
Yeah.
sure that we could get through it. And so so you have this access and agency to this age old story that Shakespeare didn't originate. He actually co-opted and wrote Romeo and Juliet out of somebody else's story. But I've always been curious about what is the impact of that story if you remove this idea of access.
Mm.
And then, of course, very recently with the pandemic, but I don't know. I grew up in the Bay Area, so I grew up watching people, fall out of their sort of middle class situation, sometimes very quickly into an impoverished situation, and then the next thing you know, that family that lived next door is on the street, and there would be no like there's no recourse. It's just buy, and this is where they are now. And now this is a kind of normalcy in the Bay Area. This is how people live. And so that's at the heart of my questions. And there were other things that were like, what if Mercutio were the greatest cipher that ever lived, right? And so what we're losing and losing Mercutio is access to Mercutio's innate ability to be able to pull up story without actually having to think about it. Like he's just got affinity and access and facility. He just pulls it in to his brain and out it comes in this like tremendous, amazing poetic form. So I had questions like that. Um, what if what if the Capulets were used to be extremely wealthy and then became destitute? Like, what if we watch this fall from grace? What if there's another motivation behind why Montague is in the position that he's in? What if the prince is a land developer? Like that. So that like because Shakespeare doesn't care, right?
Yeah.
And here's the thing, I learned this actually when I worked on and when I directed an August Wilson play when I was in grad school. There are some plays that are written so solidly that it doesn't matter what you do to it. The play still like I could have a comb and a brush and tell the whole story with a comb and a brush, and the play still is pretty solid. Doesn't care what I do. Is not thinking about me, and mostly what it's doing is telling me that I'm stupid. Um, and so that's what like that's I spent the entire rehearsal process going, I don't want to solve this problem that you've created for me, Shakespeare, because this is the play that you intended to write. How do I get into this poetic moment, or how do I solve this problem in your plot device here that I don't like or trust? And what you learn from the playwright, it's very humbling to try to break into a play as solid as this one. What's very humbling about it is there are moments where you just have to trust the artist. You just have
Hmm.
to be like, he intended this thing, and you're just going to have to know that that intention still stands. and that it's necessary in order for people to learn a little bit more about humanity. And so just go ahead and keep moving through it as if this tangible part of this play was necessary and impactful. And every time, single time I trusted it, it was like, oh, it's, it was like genius, and it's not my genius at all. It's like Shakespeare's genius right there on the page.
It's always fascinated me, like coming back to a Shakespearean text, coming back to Shakespeare, like after years away from it. And then like, life has changed you enough that this thing you couldn't see before, you can now see, right? It was always there. And this process, if you get theater pilled early enough, right? Like you start at like 14 or 15 and they're throwing R&J at you and some portion of the class is like, "Ugh," and you're just like, oh, there's something here, but I don't fully understand. And 5 years later, you're back again. You're like, oh, I get Mercutio now. I didn't get Mercutio before. And like 10 years later, like, oh, I get, and it keeps on opening. And you go
And
like,
30 years later, you're like, oh, snap.
yeah. And it's like, how is this always all here? Right. That's a whole nother conversation. But, and so we who are initiated in theater, we know this goes this way, and now there is this. To Scarlett's point, there's the game, like games are now a thing in the culture, thanks to like the entire time we've been growing up, and have firmly established themselves, and how this deeply human text that folks can find all sorts of stuff in or bring all sorts of stuff in, it can endure. And now bringing the technology side, bringing this way of telling stories through technology, I don't think that disappeared. I don't know if there's a question here, but like, I guess maybe let me tell it to Latoya. Like, you as a studio, you worked with HBO, you worked on Insecure, a game for Insecure, building in a story world there, approaching game mechanics into a story world. Was it a similar process, or what did you learn from that kind of thing, where you maybe had access to the living, authors of the work, versus this sort of oracular mode of dealing with Shakespeare?
Good question. Good question. So any studio dealing with IP, one of the things we learned the hard way is that it's tough. It's tough because you're stepping into a world that's already been created and filled out, and you're answering to all the different people that construct that world, right? And so in Insecure, we were really lucky in having a partner in like Issa and Prentice coming on really early, but they were reviewing our scripts. I'm sorry, there's like an ambulance going by. If you need to reset. But they were reviewing our scripts in the beginning of this. It's just, let me tell you the stress. I never written a game before. And then Issa Rae is reading my freaking scripts to see if it like does justice to her work in the constraints of like, I'm mobile. I have to write this line in 29 characters. Like, I might want to say something else, but it doesn't make sense. And then like the ways in which you write for a game that feels like it moves and it's punchy and it's interesting is very different than how you write for other forms, particularly linear forms, where you have like total control of what the audience wants to do. The audience has an expectation that they are going to be involved and that they play. As soon as you call something a game, people slide into this other sense of I should be doing something. I am the main character. I am the hero here. And you have to figure out how you balance those different pieces. What was interesting to us about as a studio about this work, and so it's me, the lead programmer, Owen, Chris, Mitu, and Anango. When we started thinking about what was interesting to us about this specific project and what was interesting even in more detail about what Nataki was creating, was creating all of these weird little curiosities about characters I hadn't thought about. So I'm a child of the 90s and the O's. Baz Luhrmann's interpretation of Romeo and Juliet was playing in theaters when I was young. And so like that, we were, of course you would do modern adaptations. Of course you would go do these things. Like there was a new one every week. There was like, Mekhi Phifer had one. There was Taming of the Shrew got done, right? Famously with Heath Ledger and Julia Stiles.
10 Things I Hate About You. Yeah.
I mean, this was my era. This is my teen movie era. So it was like, you just go. Like, of course this is going to happen. And so when we wanted to see something new about something that you love, you're going, okay, what else can I see in this play that would be interesting? That would bring me back into it, especially considering there's so many other ways now to spend your time. There's so many other things competing. And we talk about this a lot when we talk about the war for attention. Mm-hmm. Because most people aren't competing in their category anymore. It's not like I'm just competing against other TV shows. I'm not just competing against, other plays that are happening. You're not just competing against, what's in the multiplex. everything is competition with your phone, what's happening with your friends. Everything is trying to fight for the small window of attention. So it's like, okay, so what's compelling about this piece? What's interesting? What's going to be different? What is different about somebody coming here and playing Hella Iambic and being in Ashland specifically that they can't get from a different rendition of it? They can go to the Globe. I want another version of R&J, right? I could watch The Baz Luhrmann again. It's on Netflix. I can watch it. Right? Like, what is the difference? What's going to compel me to come? And so when we started thinking about that, and again, the fun of this was because Nataki's vision was so crisp and so clear. I think there was one part where they were doing the Queen Mab moment. They were like workshopping it in the hall run. I had never seen a hall run before, by the way. I was like, I don't even know what this is, but I'm just going to sit here and take notes. And I remember at one point the actors got frustrated because they were feeling it. They were fully in character and they wanted to say other stuff and they couldn't say other stuff. They were constrained to what was in the current text. And so I think the vocal cords just like called out something like, Prithvi, yo, hear me. Like just really make it super fresh and feeling like, I'm also Black like Nataki. We're also actually both from DC as well. So it's another like specific Black experience that you talk about versus West Coast versus East Coast and all these other things. But I remember sitting there and being like, man, this is the Blackest Shakespeare moment I think I've ever had. And I want to make sure that other people feel that when they come and touch this so that you can understand that there's different lenses from which to understand this work. And I think to Scarlett's earlier point and to Nataki's earlier points, there's a lot of gatekeeping in the arts in general. There's a right way to enjoy the arts. There's a right way to like Shakespeare. There's a right way to do these things. And normally these types of adaptations, these outsider perspectives aren't always welcome when you start doing these types of things. And so just the fact that, like, again, I loved Baz Luhrmann's version. I am Mercutio all day, all day. I have never thought about Tybalt in my life. Never. This is the man that's stabbing people. That's Tybalt, right? I wasn't thinking about Tybalt. And then the costume designers for this production made Tybalt so swagged out. Number one, it's like me and Owen are sitting in the audience and we were like, who is he playing? Is this Tybalt as Wesley Snipes in Blade? Like, he had this cape at one point.
Oh, what?
It's so popular that we put the cape in as an inside joke in the app. You're going to have to play it to see it. But there's an inside joke about the cape. We had like this cape.
Tybalt as Blade is not something. And then you said it and I'm instantly like, oh,
yeah. We were watching him play this. And then like with each outfit, like the portrayal shifted. Oh. And so then we just got so curious about Tybalt. So then Tybalt comes out in this other like amazing suit with roses and the red. Like it got so much so that we decided we needed a Capulet level group chat and we called the group chat Touch My Swag. It was so ridiculous. Like, but it really started to go, okay, what are the different motivations? And it's interesting because again, the initial cut of the play that we were working with and that we were designing towards. So again, when you talk about designing for live experiences, my Lord, did not know all the things that we were going to get into with this one. In the initial cut of the play, there's not tons of characterization for Tybalt. Not tons. And a lot of the scenes around him were kind of cut. So he's kind of like just this hothead that pops out, and then he's like got an argument, and then he comes in. And then as the show continued in rehearsals and keeping workshopping, more of Tybalt's personality comes in. More of his concern comes in. More of his, I'm actually a doting older sibling of this whole crew. I'm going to defend everybody's honor. Nobody's going to step to my little sister if I'm going to let her, right? Or my little cousin in this case, Juliet. And it's just like, oh, wow, this person has a story and a means. And then when we realized, we're like, okay, wait. I mean, there were just so many questions we were trying to answer about this one project. So again, we had the Verona Bros group chat, but we're a women of color-led studio. So we're like, we're the Verona Bays. Like, what are the women doing in this? And, quite frankly, not much, right? Juliet, generally, in a lot of these presentations, is an object. And in Nataki's interpretation, she keeps the lens really firmly on Juliet, even though Juliet is kind of being acted upon in a lot of the different scenes. And so even those shifts, right? We're like, okay, how do we play with this? If we give these people a say, what do we do with this folk? And do we balance it between the Montagues and the Capulets and have everybody have a say? But then how many activations is that per minute? The other thing that I always bring up here that I think is super important to understand when you're building experiences, period, are people's different levels of comprehension. And so one of the things we're talking about in terms of trying to make like something that's timed to a live event. So already a live event means it could happen at different times. There's not it's not a keyable thing. Somebody has
Right.
to listen for the prompt and then go, and the prompt might get missed, all these other things. So that's one just tactical consideration. But the second piece is, how long does it take someone to experience the thing that you made? One of the things we learned about Insecure was reading speed was a really, really big indicator of how much fun somebody was going to have. And so we're asking our players to do a lot of work reading and interpreting, but also at the same time processing what else is happening on screen or on stage in front of them. And we're asking them to come back and forth and to participate in this one zone and then come back and give their attention to this other zone. And then we don't always know, is this going to take somebody 30 seconds to read? Is it going to take them a minute to read? Is it
Mhm.
going to take them 2 minutes to read? What's their motivation for reading all of this in the first place? What is the piece that they like? And so trying to work through those pieces and those understandings was a big one. And then also using the rhyme step mechanic that we made. So the way it works, it's rap rhyme composition. So most things in games are what we call rhythm action. You press the
Mhm.
button in time, and that's how it works. With ours, we added a layer thanks to Anango, who has a rap brain and can be like, this is how we're going to do the bars. We added a layer of composition where players select the word they want to use next. So for our test case, we took one of the opening sonnets of the play and then just had 3 bar inputs. So it's like, okay, so in Fair Verona, where we lay our scene, that's how it opens. We started it by going like, okay, is it Fair Verona? Is it Cuddy Verona? So about Bay Area line. Is it grimy Verona? What Verona does somebody want to be in right now?
Mhm.
And then how do they express that for themselves? Do they think Romeo and Juliet are beautiful, star-crossed, stupid? How do they feel? How are you feeling about the play in this moment? And so we had an envision for the Insecure game, and the way that Mirror Beats works in that game is it's a self-check-in in a lot of ways. Something has happened in the plot or something has happened with the player, and then they're able to craft a rhyme that reflects who they are and how they feel. And we wanted to take that same piece to, again, the super iconic work and allow the players to say, okay, this is how I felt about everything that just happened. I'm witnessing it. And I think one of the biggest things when you're watching Romeo and Juliet, because it's such a tragedy, is you know that we're on, at some point, you're on this rail that we can't get off. We all know how this is going to end, right? But giving the player intermission, that traditional break, to be able to process what they felt and what they seen, particularly in this version, because in this version, intermission hits at Act 3.1 after everyone is murdered, after Tybalt dies, after Mercutio dies. There's all the stuff when intermission is like booms right here. And we wanted that moment for the player to be able to breathe and take a space and say, okay, here's how I feel about what happened. So I think for us, a lot of what we try to do with the playable experience is to keep the person centered in the moment. And that's weird because people normally think of phones and stuff like that as breaking presence or being something that is competing directly with the work. But with us, we wanted it to be like, this is the way in which you show your love or you show your frustration or you show your feeling for what you just saw.
And there's a way in which, to Nataki's point earlier about, when people started playing with second screen experiences, we didn't really have the relationship with phones then that we do now. Now it's very much the way we go deeper into something is we look for things in our phones about what we're looking at, or we express, our own feelings about what we're witnessing on the phone, and that's who we've become as a people collectively. I got one more question before I let you all go, because I know we've gone long, but there's a lot of you, and this has been good. Looking at the deck about the app, there's a roadmap here that's positioning it not just as a one-off, but as an ongoing platform for engagement. I think I'm parsing that right, and I'm just thinking about it is Hella Iambic, or the framework that you've built here, something that's destined to live on beyond this production, beyond beyond how OSF uses it, kind of getting it out into the wider world of performing arts. Is that something that you're looking at as you're making this and as you're releasing this out into the world?
Absolutely. So when we first started this project, we didn't think, like, literally this was just a cool thing we could go do with Nataki and with Scarlett. Like, that was it. That was the whole vision. And as we started talking to other art leaders about it, people were really excited. And we didn't realize that, like, I guess this is something that people were searching for. Scarlett can speak to this more in terms of being able to relate and have some kind of playable product that wasn't too difficult to set up, that wasn't going to compete with the thing you're doing, wasn't going to cost millions and millions of dollars, but would still allow people to engage and have fun and relate to the work in a really different way. And I think for us, we we started thinking about how we wanted to expand it after Hella Iambic. So like we haven't talked about augmented at all in this conversation, which is, again, it's just there's so much that we could potentially do with it. But one of the things is about a shared sense of place. Like, is it important to you that you went to something at the Kennedy Center, at the Lincoln Center, in Ashland? Is it important to you? What does that space mean in terms of the way that this is interpreted and why? How do I make my mark on a place that I've been? How do I select places that I've been? Um, and so, these were the way in which the project's evolving is we're thinking about ways in which other live experiences could benefit from having this type of feeling. So we absolutely want to start with this one, and this this experience is very much tailored to Nataki's vision. But I think as it grows and as it expands, we're looking at, okay, can this be repeatable? Is this something that traditional traditional mountings of this play are going to want? Is this something that musicians would want to play with? Is this something that we can do in small club venues? Is there something that we can do in different pieces? And just figuring out how a system works to allow an artist to basically come in and expand the world that they're playing in through this app. That's what we're looking toward.
Yeah, to add to that, I mean, Latoya and I were having coffee in Ashland, and Latoya casually said the most revolutionary thing about, like, oh yeah, this is going to become a platform that changes how we experience live experiences. And that really, has been an anchor for me of, like we talked about, there's been explorations of second screen experiences to film as part of extended cinema. But I think this what we're exploring is really unclassifiable, emergent, captures something about this more expansive way of thinking about attention span, our attention span in our intimate relationship to digital media and immersive technology we have in 2023. So I'm really excited about this turning. This is the first step. I mean, we always called it a kind of a vertical slice because we knew that it would be a kind of a first step to something that we can scale up, that can really be repeatable, but also a really bespoke way of expanding the world of live experiences. And that doesn't just have to be plays or classical plays. That can be all kinds of live experiences. And I think it's also an audience engagement strategy. I think this is really excited about those high school students who come here with, maybe they're rolling their eyes about, like, oh, I have to go see Shakespeare. That's irrelevant to me. But then their relationship to storytelling being able to be shifted with this work. So I think I'm really excited about it as a active as an engagement strategy that we can partner with and support other performing arts presenters. I think it's also a way of thinking about fandom differently. I think there's so many ways that this can be a powerful kind of catalyst to expanding access. One, just my favorite kind of like future, like I feel like there's a bucket of like all the things that we would do as we imagine the future of it. And one of the things is like taking the bars you wrote inside of the play and tagging the world around you and kind of like making a mark in the outside exterior environment in and around the theater. I think that, I mean, literally expands the world of the play beyond the curtain up and curtain down. But like, what is the ostensible world, and what is this other layer of storytelling in the world around us beyond the theater, beyond the space of the theater? How can the world become actually our theater?
Nataki, any last thoughts before we go?
I also feel like there is this possibility that this becomes a tool in all kinds of ways for live experiences. I've always thought of it as also an educational tool because I'm one of those kids that was ferried off to the local theater, and then I'm told that every way in which I engage with the work that I'm watching is wrong. And I was just looking for a way to make sure that another generation of people could actually feel like they were supposed to be in those spaces and that they were supposed to have those experiences, and they were supposed to have a way of expressing their experience in the tools that they actually use on a regular basis. And so I think that's the sort of overarching goal for me is how do you create something that's interesting and exciting to me as an individual artist, but also that can be utilized, in all kinds of other ways. I I find those people that lament the possibility of this sort of interruption of the live theater experience. I find those people to be exhausting, that they're like, that they're so worried things are going to go in a certain direction as we are moving in that direction anyway. And so I'm really excited about a time when, when my daughter, who's 2 years old, gets to go to the theater, and it's like, oh boy, it's so boring that I get to use my phone in here. I wonder what the new thing is that I can do. I wonder how else I can engage with this. Oh God, these are old fashioned tools, right? I do hope that that this is an evolution that inspires an evolution that leads to another evolution, so that in 100 years they can do with it what they want, what they need to do. That's my goal.
Fantastic. Well, Nataki, Scarlett, Latoya, thank you all for spending so much time with me today, so much time with the audience. RNJ is running right now up in Ashland at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, and by the time this comes out, it'll almost be time for Hella Iambic to be playable along with the show. Thank you all so much, and everyone can check the show notes for the links to all the work that's going on.
Thank you very much, Noah. Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Noah.
Thank you.
Once again, I want to thank Nataki, Garrett, Scarlett, Kim, and Latoya Peterson for being our guests on the show this week. Check the show notes for links to that production of RNJ and for links to Glow Up Games. Let's get you connected with these folks. I promised you at the end or towards the middle of the news break that I was going to give you my take on the news of the day this week. I don't want to take too much away from this excellent episode and have the news stuff kind of overwhelm it all. So I am going to do an irregular this week to kind of go even deeper, even more off the cuff. But here's what's up when it comes to Star Cruiser closing, because I'm seeing like a lot of initial reactions, and I'm looking at it all. I'm looking at what Reddit's doing. I'm looking at how it's going in Variety. I'm looking at people, I'm not going to Diz Twitter, because, I value my sanity. I'm looking at our Discord. I'm looking at, everything immersive, like the group we have. And, there are some people who are dancing on its grave because some people have been, waiting for this to fail. I'll just, let's cop to that right from the start. And there's all kinds of reasons why they've been waiting for this to fail. Some folks, and I do not count them. I do not count myself amongst these folks in quite the same way. But there are folks for whom this was always too expensive. I'm definitely someone who could not afford to go. And didn't get like special dispensation. We have a small but dedicated listener base. I know a lot of people who made it listen to the show. I know a lot of people who made the thing. And I've been talking, with a couple of those folks today, lightly about it. Cause it's a shock to the system to hear this has happened. But when that thing was brought out, let me just cut to the brass tacks. The marketing on this failed so spectacularly, down to the level where SF Gate today had a headline that was failed $5,000 a night Star Wars hotel to close. There was only 2 words in there that were accurate: to close. Failed, always subjective. You can make a very strong argument because it's closing, right? Those things go together. But it wasn't $5,000 a night. It was $5,000 for a room for 2 nights, which is a big difference. Still a lot of money, but a big difference because you're talking more than one person and you're talking more than one night. And it wasn't just a hotel, but you look at anyone talking about it, and almost uniformly, $5,000 hotel. $5,000 a night hotel, $5,000 a night hotel. Once that entered into people's consciousness, it was not getting washed away. That failure that failure right there is the seed of what is happening right now. Now, there are reasons why it was so expensive, but even then, when you get a categorical error like that basically doubles the price, and messes with everyone's perceptions, there's no hope. And we know that Star Wars is all about hope. So that's the thing that if I was in my cups right now, I'd be most in my cups about, is that spectacular marketing failure right from the start. That is why we wound up where we are today. The other big thing is that it was opened in 2022 as we're coming out of the pandemic. It's a cruise setup. We had this little thing in our Discord. I basically said, "Does anyone know how the cruise industry is doing?" And Catherine, of course, being the master of searching and finding things instantly, dropped in the cruise information, and it's looking like the cruise industry is only halfway back to what it was in 2019. And this whole thing was modeled after a cruise. So we cannot discount that this was designed for a different time than the one that we're living in right now. And yet I can tell there's a lot of people who are like, immersive is over. The experience economy is over, which is why I'm taking a moment to talk to you right now and say, bullshit, absolute bullshit. We have not figured out, we haven't cracked the nut yet on how all this stuff does work, but the sheer FOMO, the haterade that was brewed over this thing, that I myself secretly drank. I was like, oh, am I gotta win the lottery to go? Or a rich friend has to take mercy on my soul. I need more rich friends. The demand's there. The demand of that price? No. The economy's changed. COVID's changed everything. People don't do cruises in quite the same way, let alone a land cruise. And on top of it all, you tell someone like, well, it's $5,000 a night at the Star Wars hotel, and someone will tell you, go, and I'll save some of that for the irregular. But of course, that isn't what it was. And no, this mode of work is far from dead. And the best possibility here, there is a silver lining, and maybe I'll focus more on in the irregular. The silver lining is that thing is built. It has all the physical structure in it. There are some folks I know who are saying like, oh, this is like when, the nighttime spectacular goes away. I don't know. I really don't know. But it does allow an opportunity. Sorry, I keep hitting the microphone with a cord. It does allow the opportunity to take things down, do some level of retooling, and then remarket it in a way that reflects the actual price, as opposed to letting everyone run around with $5,000 a night. Will they do that? No clue. Am I betting on that? No, I'm not betting on that. The headwinds are bad in the economy, and the company is making lots of cuts, so don't bet on that. But they also invested a lot of money in pouring a lot of concrete and building a lot of things out. So expect some kind of second act, and hopefully we won't get into some sort of weird, just inert Star Wars mall situation. But I doubt the adventure is completely over for this way of being and thinking. Anyway, a lot more of that nature in the irregular. I will do a short recap. The next stage is coming along. I gotta put the rest of the schedule up. Take a look if you want. The program guide keeps evolving. Also, we just evolved the way the affinity dinners are going to work. Keep an eye out for an email about that. Those of you who have been grabbing the workshop passes, you should have a survey by now, and you need to pick your things. You've got a few more days next week to get me back that information before we do class selection, before I put it through the black box algorithm that is in my head and look at everything and make sure that we try and make everybody happy. It's just always a goal at this point, trying to make everybody happy. And yeah, there's all kinds of more fun people joining. But we're an hour and 9 minutes in, and so I'm going to leave that for next time. We have another wonderful episode is coming up next week on the show. I'm going to fire up an Airtable real quick. The thing I love most in the world is firing up an Airtable. No, spinning one up is what I think I love the most. Next week on the show, we're talking with Aaron Riley of the Texas Immersive Institute. That was also a really fun conversation. So tune in for that. And of course, we'll be dropping things in the regular feed and here and there and everywhere. And with more news breaks. We'll talk to you about it. Hopefully more good news. There's a few things on the horizon we're really looking forward to. On that note, let's do the end of the show. The associate producer of this podcast is Parker Sella. Music for No Proscenium is by Chris Porter of the Speakeasy Society and Solar, the podcast. Special thanks to Siobhan O'Loughlin for voicing our intro. This is mostly my fault. I am Noah Nelson, and until next time, I'll see you at the show.